Hey everybody. So for today's movie review, I'm going to talk about the film The Hangover Part 2. It is, as you expect, the second part of the Hangover franchise. Actually, a part 3 is in development. I've actually seen set photos of it. But I finally got around to seeing part 2. I know it came out in 2011, I think. Um, right now part 3 is in development, catching up on the series. Saw part 2 not too long ago. Um, and so here I'm going to review for it. I'm going to review the film for you today. So in part two, you guys, it takes place roughly short after the first film. The Ed Helms character is trying to get married again. He's marrying a different woman. They're having the wedding in Bangkok, Thailand, and so he has to try to recruit the wolf pack from part one again, and basically throw what's going to be the real wedding. And so he recruits everybody. He's kind of hesitant about Zach Galifianakis since he was pretty much the one that started up the whole events of part one from the Hangover series. So kind of hesitant about bringing him to this one. But eventually he does kind of come to his senses and brings him along anyway. And so basically, they're at Thailand. He's just kind of, Ed Helms is kind of ignoring every possible offer of alcohol, doesn't want to do anything to do with it. Basically trying to ignore the events from part one as much as possible. But he eventually does, once again, kind of come to his senses, and the guys bring him these sealed bottles of beer over by the campfire. Everybody just gets one beer. That's the end of it. The wedding's the following day. As you expect, though, since it is a hangover film or a hangover sequel, things do go wrong, and this time the events happen due to something else. It's not something in the alcohol this time. But it is revealed in the film. I don't want to give it away in this review how kind of these big events, big, weird, unusual events happen overnight again. So basically, like the part one, they wake up in a hotel, a different one in Bangkok, Thailand this time, not in Vegas. And something different happens to them this time. In fact, I can even just show you this because it's even right on the cover. Zach Galifianakis gets a shaved head. Ed Helms now has a tattoo instead of a lost tooth. And, well, Bradley Cooper's just hung over again. Also, Doug is in this one. He has a more minor role in this one. Um, he had the beer left, so he was kind of the lucky one this time. He didn't have anything to do with, you know, this events of the hangover the following morning. Um, but this time around, instead of a baby, they find a monkey. Um, and the nude guy from the trunk comes back in this one. He actually has a bigger role in this one. Mike Tyson's back in this one. Basically, they tried to get as much as the cast as possible. Someone I did notice from part one that was pretty big to part one that didn't come back was the Heather Graham character. Wasn't in this one at all. Um, so basically, you guys, it's part one, but in Thailand, and this time around, rather than looking for Doug, they got to look for um, the brother of the character that Ed Helms is going to marry. So they got to look for her brother. And so basically, kind of the disadvantage they run into this time is because they don't kind of speak the Thailand language, it's kind of harder to find things. It's just a much harder time because they're in a different country and a different culture, where this kind of behavior that they ran into in part one is even more unacceptable in this country. Um, so basically, it's part one in a different country. So the Hangover Part Two, you guys, I thought it was a good film, but like I said though, I mean it's just so similar to Part One. If you liked Part One, you're gonna like this one, but there's something kind of off about it because it is so similar. Um, so first and foremost, positives for this film. I liked that the leads were back, and not only were the leads back, but I knew them better this time. I kind of went into this film knowing more about these characters, and I guess that's a good thing because in part one we're just starting to learn about them. We don't really know a lot about them, so it's kind of hard to sympathize with them in part one. But in this time, because we know them better, it's kind of easier to understand kind of how they're feeling about certain things. We kind of know what their values are. There were some really beautiful shots of Thailand in this one. As far as like scenery goes and shots go, I do think part two was a little bit better than part one in that sense. When you watch this film, it almost makes you think Vegas looked dirty in some ways, just because some of the shots they're able to get in here are really beautiful, especially near the beginning, especially on the shots where with the weddings happening before and at the end of the film. Um, and just shot wise, location wise, it was kind of just more interesting in that sense, just because I've seen more stereotypical types of Vegas in so many different films already. It was nice to kind of see a refreshing take on that, and this time it was in Thailand with a new, fresh take on it. I think um, there were some occasional clever reinventions of certain things from the first film. I actually did kind of like the monkey a little bit better than this one than the baby. The baby was just kind of sat there and the characters played off of the baby. This time the monkey was the joke. He was the one providing the joke. Um, so basically it was a drug dealing monkey, and as stupid as that sounds, it actually was. Um, I actually thought pretty clever for what they did with him. So writing wise for the monkey, I had no problems. I thought they did a lot of really clever things with this monkey, and in fact, he was probably one of the more likable characters in the film. Um, there was also a monk in this film that never talked because he claimed to be like somebody claimed that he was meditating this whole time, but he was a part of like the party that night when they were drunk. Um, it was just kind of funny seeing this guy that wouldn't talk, who knew all this stuff that went on the night before. Kind of, he was a part of this adventure, but it was silent the whole time. And what they did with him was pretty clever when you think about it. Especially when you see like the video of the night, he's just kind of still sitting there being the meditation guy. So I thought that was kind of clever. Um, I really like that Paul Giamatti was involved with this film. I'm a huge Paul Giamatti fan. Really glad that he was a part of this one. I think he definitely made the film better than it was probably going to be without him. Um, there was a twist with this character at the end that he played, and he was just, I just love Paul Giamatti. He just adds so much to every character he ever plays. Ever since American Splendor and Sideways, I love watching this guy on screen. If I ever become a director someday, I definitely want to work with him. He just seems like a really likable guy and a really fun guy to work with in a film. So I'm really glad that he got involved with this film because, like I said, without him, I don't think this film would have floated as well without his involvement. I put this as both a good and a bad thing. I personally liked this part of the film, but if you love the first film a lot, you might not like this. Um, this is a tamer story, I felt, than part one. It didn't feel as wild as part one, but to me, I like that because those are the kind of comedies I tend to like, kind of the tamer, funny in its own way kind of film. But part one was a very wild movie. So if you really like the wildness of part one, you may not like this one simply because it just isn't as wild as part one, not as extreme the following morning when they're hungover, things of that nature. I personally liked that. I know there's going to be some people out there that really didn't like that though, that part of the film. So I kind of put that as both a positive and a negative of this film, depending on how you viewed part one. As far as the negatives go, you guys, I felt there were too many scenes that felt like carbon copy replicas of part one. Even though I did like some of the reinventions, like the monkey and the monk, um, just a lot of scenes in here really felt like carbon copies, but especially at the end when they show the photos during the end credits, that felt exactly like part one. It ended the same way part one did. The wedding at the end when they finally arrived played out exactly like part one. Is this one of those things where they literally went back to the part one script, scratched out car, replaced it with boat. They scratched out baby, replaced it with monkey. They scratched out this person, replaced it with this person. It definitely had that kind of feeling to it. And I just would have really liked to have seen a different story for the Hangover franchise. A different story. Not just the same one with certain things crossed out and added in. A completely different story, a completely different quest, completely different premise. You can make them drunk, you can make them hungover. Do something different with it. Um, not as I just didn't think it was as fun as part one. I just remember leaving part one being just felt like I went on a wild adventure. And like I said, because even though I kind of like the tameness of this, it was almost too different. And I think people, especially those who really enjoyed part one, are really not going to like that. There was some really lame singing breakout scenes in here. Really didn't it just didn't need to be in here. I think Ed Helms, Zach Galifianakis, I think even Mike Tyson had a singing breakout scene in this at some point. Really didn't need to be in there. I didn't think it was just really really bad. There were some big characters in part one that were too minor in here. Doug was definitely one of them. I felt they underused Doug in this. I felt they underused Zach Galifianakis' dad. I think he's only in one scene in here. Definitely underused Mike Tyson. He barely has. I don't even think he has 7 minutes of footage in here. Um, so really underused him. I felt. Like I said before, the photos during the end credits just felt exactly like part one. It almost wasn't funny just because it was exactly the same thing I saw in part one. So basically it was a kind of a rerun of part one. Like I said before, I just really would have liked to seen something different done with this. So overall, guys, I do give The Hangover Part Two an 8 out of 10. It is a decent film because part one was a decent film. So if you liked part one, you're gonna like part two. If you didn't like part one, you're obviously gonna really hate this one. Um, if part three is made, and it looks like it is because I've seen set photos, please, 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 Todd Phillips, do something different. Give us a different story. Give us something new. Give us new characters. Give us new scenarios. Give them something new when they're drunk the following morning, when they're hungover. Give them something new. So basically, I would like to see something new for part three. It's part three. It's not part one again. It's part three. So when you make part three, do something different with it, please. Um, so that was kind of my little rant, you guys. Like I said, 8 out of 10 for me. A decent film, but nothing too special here. Pretty much my review in a nutshell, if you want to say that, is if you like part one, you're going to like part two. So if you like part one, see this one. If you didn't like part one, do not see this one.